Good morning and welcome back to A Novel Lunch. My name is Pamela S. Thibodeau, and I am so excited to bring another guest to you today. I'd like to introduce you to Hope Clark. Hope, welcome to A Novel Lunch. Please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you write and how you got started.
I've been writing full time for between 20 and 25 years now. And I've always written. I've always known the power of words from the time I first learned words. To impress a teacher with how well you could put words together, I learned was golden. And so in school when they said, "Hey, we're going to have an essay final exam," I'm like, "Got this." Because everybody else is wanting multiple choice and all this, but you can impress with an essay, and teachers remember that. And so I learned there was power in words from the beginning, and I've taught all my children the same thing. But I traveled up through the federal government for my first career and actually retired at 46 from the federal government with 25 years service in order to write full time. But I can say every single promotion I ever got was due to my words. Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely due to my
amazing.
words.
That's amazing.
And I mean, you can be strategic with your wording, and I learned to do that. So anyway, I worked up to second in command in the state for a federal agency, and then finally, when it was turning political, I was going to have to accept a political position. I finally went, nope, not doing it. I'm going to write. and uh, I started off by escaping from the stresses of the day by going home and writing 15 minutes a day. I knew a new habit had to be instilled in my routine that was already busy. So I just picked 15 minutes. Now, I didn't know what I wanted to write back then. And so I did what every new writer does, and that's write about yourself, which, I tell people to do that and get it out of your system and move on. Do your chicken soup story, do your little memoir, do your little vignette, get that stuff out of your system and then move on to something serious. Um, and I did that for a while, even landed in chicken soup. I got published in a few places, but the 15 minutes was to instill a habit. And then it got to where I wanted to do it. So that made me go past 15 minutes. Now, I had a family at home at the time. We had 4 boys, and 15 minutes was all I could afford at the end of the day. And it usually wound up being between 11 and 12 o'clock at night. So I did that, and then I started grabbing hours on the weekends and, holidays. I'd devote half the day, that kind of thing. So it became a habit that I consciously strove to achieve until I was asked. I freelanced for a few years just to prove I could sell my words. That was it. And I was winning a few contests, and I uh, just decided, hey, maybe you can do this. So, um, but I had had an experience working for the Department of Agriculture. That's who I worked for with the federal government. And at the time, I managed a big area, and I had one of my clients actually offer me a bribe. And, in the federal government, you don't do that. Now, we tend to blow that off. The guy came in and said, "I'll give you $10,000 if you do this and this and this." And I looked at him and went, "Get out of here." I just messed with him until I realized he was serious. And it's against the law for me not to report it. So I reported it. And 2 days later, I had federal agents on my doorstep. And we did a sting operation and setting them up, and I had to memorize a script every night. My office had to be wired every day. It was a little bit harrowing. Uh, and we didn't really catch the guy. He started smelling it, I think. That, and I'm not sure he had the money to start with. He got a little threatening about it, and they shut down the investigation because, first of all, it wasn't enough money. And in the federal government, if it's not a big something you can blow up in the press, they tend to just sweep it under the rug. And that got swept. So, But a few months later, I started dating the federal agent, and that's who I married. That's who I eventually married. But I think part of the attraction was that I loved mysteries. I loved reading mysteries, and I realized I was not writing something I really loved. And I had a friend say, "You ought to write that situation that you just went through." And so I spent a couple of years reducing that to paper. That is where I started going from 15 minutes a day to more like how many words a day, and it became 500 words.
So would you say that having that excitement around the story is what helped you to evolve from 15 minutes to, like you said, 500 words and then more?
Possibly, I wasn't just writing just to be a writer, and I see so much of that these days. I wanna be a writer. Well, what do you wanna write? I don't know. Well, then rethink that thought, because if
Right.
something's not exciting you to write, you're wasting your time and a reader's time. So, you need to shape yourself as to what type of writer you want to be excited about it. And there's just not enough of that these days. Uh, yeah, I sit back and I'm silent on a lot of boards on Facebook and other places, and I just shake my head and go, "Okay, 2 years you'll be gone, 5 years you'll be gone." I mean, I'm
Yeah.
like, I hear no energy, I hear no excitement, I hear no love. Nobody loves the written word. They love having published. Um, so anyway, it took that story. I thought it was silly at first until I started penning it down. But I'll tell you, it took me several years to get that story right because I didn't have a fictional voice at the time. Because you write a book length product does not mean it ought to be out there published. That's your
Right.
practice book. That is your practice book. And, I think people should write 2 or 3 practice books before they put one out there. But, we're not that kind of culture. We think, "Oh, if I spent so much time putting it down, and somebody's gotta read it." And then you wind up publishing something that doesn't work. Uh, but after a few years, I kinda put it up on the shelf. I had chances at agents who rejected me, and I mean, I had a couple of people I knew in the business who through Funds for Writers, my other side, um, still got rejected, which told me the writing wasn't ready. Y you know, so I went back to freelancing, and it wasn't until I met a published author at a book signing that she had heard of me, but not in a creative writing sense, and when I told her, "Yeah, there was this book," she says, "Oh my god, you need to stop and write the book because you're gonna kick yourself 10 years from now that you haven't done it." So I went back and I pulled it off the shelf. I still had it, I mean, printed out in a manuscript box, and I read it and went, "Oh my god, no wonder this thing didn't get published, it totally sucked." Yeah, and that had been 4 years of a gap where I had done nothing but freelance and, moved up in the world with Funds for Writers, and I was writing for magazines, so I knew how to put words together, and I learned how to be creative with them, but a book-length fiction product is a whole different animal, and, so I opened it back up after she said that, and I threw it away, kept an outline, and rewrote it from scratch, and that was my first book.
Wonderful. That's amazing how that happens. And, you remind me of everybody says, an overnight success, but you don't necessarily see the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 25 years that goes before that overnight success. So, would you consider yourself a plotter or a pantster or a hybrid writer?
90% pantser. I mean, I just started a novel 3 days ago, um, and I sat down with a blank screen, and all I had was the crime. That's it. And, and of course, who got killed? Yeah, I write mystery. And it was like how it took me 2 days of starting and stopping and starting and stopping for the first chapter. And, I'm into chapter 2 now after 3 hard days, and, the flow will pick up once all the characters are in place and it starts moving a little bit. I still don't have my twists and turns, but I don't like thinking that far ahead because the longer, I marinate, I guess you can call it, the story in my head, the more options pop up. So I hate outlining. I've never had an outline work. I've never gotten past 3 chapters of an outline before it took off in another direction. I I don't have that kind of time.
Yeah.
I don't wanna waste that much energy. Let me just sit down and do this.
Right, right. Well, mine, I'm pretty much the same way. I just write. I have a tagline or a title or a scene or I'll hear a comment and I just kind of move from there. It's like, okay, so like for my book, The Inheritance, I had this thought. Like they say life begins at 40, but for Rebecca Sinclair, that's far from the truth. And I'm thinking, okay, who are you other than Rebecca Sinclair and why? Why is that far from the truth? So being nosy, I got her to tell me her stories. I love it when that happens. I don't outline or plot at all either. Like I said, sometimes I may get a couple scenes in advance, but then I have to move them from there to the next scene and on and so forth. So you mentioned funds for writers a couple times. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, Funds for Writers came around because I was, with the federal government. I understood funding, I understood grants, and in my own efforts to propel my own writing, I studied contests, and at that time, there weren't a lot of newsletters for that information, and so I'm a researcher going way back, man, I can research anything, and so I started pulling these things out, and if I had a writer friend, I'd say, "Hey, take a look at this. Oh, take a look at that. Have you ever heard of this?" And, at the time, there were only 3 major writers' newsletters. There was mine, Angela Hoy's, who's still around, um, which is Writers Weekly, and then, oh my gosh, I can't remember her name because she retired, God, 15 years ago. Um, but she became a ghostwriter and got tired of the newsletter. Uh, she actually was a ghostwriter for Celine Dion's book. But anyway, so it and we all did different things, but I focused mine on funds where, writers didn't know how to make a living. And I was asked by a website to come speak to their a group at a bookstore, at a Barnes& and Noble, and I was telling them about contests and a little bit about grants. And they just started throwing problems at me. But I can't afford this, and I don't know how to do that, and so I just started troubleshooting. "Okay, tell me your problem." I mean, the whole talk just went off the rails, and I started troubleshooting, and I left there going, "There's something here." And I went home and started the newsletter for just a few people to those people, and within 2 months, I had 200 people, and within
Wow.
6 months, I had 2,000 people, and I've kept it. And then what happened is Writer's Digest heard about it and contacted me and said, "This is so cool," and put me on their 101 best websites for writers at the time, and we've been on it every year since, and that's 25 times. So, that's fun for writers. It's a free newsletter every Friday, and it contains, grants, contests, freelance markets, and publishers/agents with open calls for submissions. I do vet them all. I have turned down some pretty good ones because they didn't meet my standards. It just for instance, I don't think money for a contest should be any more than 5 to 10% of the first prize purse. You gonna charge $30 for a $200 first prize? No, I won't list you because you're being greedy. Um, and especially if it's for like a short story versus a novel. So we've gotten very good at vetting contests, and I know what's good and what's not. Reading rights. I don't want to drop a lot of names, but there's a couple of well-known contests out there. One's fairly new that I just declined, and I said, You're taking too many rights, and you're making people give up rights just for submitting, and that's not acceptable." I said,
No,
"Now, I understand if you wanna take all rights if you win, that's the writer's choice at that point, whether or not to enter, but just because they enter and they lose rights to that story, no, no."
no,
So I turned them
no.
down, and I actually turned around, and since they gave me an email explaining what they were doing and they weren't gonna budge, I went, editorial time. It went into Funds for Writers, I named them, and, because my readers have followed me for years, and I'm loyal to those readers, and so if I find somebody that can easily, take your money, take your rights, whatever, I'm gonna expose it.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing, and I've always loved Funds for Writers. I haven't gotten the newsletter lately. I think I might need to re-sign up for it. But I remember that's one of the ways we met, if I remember
Mhm.
correctly, is because I submitted things to Funds for Writers, and that we kind of you've come to conferences and things like that for Bayou Writers Group. So it's been a wonderful collaboration. Our friendship or whatever. But I want to thank you for coming by. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention that to our listeners about, staying motivated to keep writing? We know that the project has to excite you, but whatever some other tips that you could give them to get those words down.
Show up every day. And there are some writers out there, some famous ones that go, "You don't have to do it every day because then you'll get tired of it." I totally disagree because I think it needs to be such an instilled habit that you feel unfulfilled at the end of the day if you have not sat down and put some words on the page. And that's the way I live. I mean, my husband will actually come in and go, "Did you get your word count today?" Because when I'm in the middle of a novel, it's 1,000 words a day. And when I get toward the end of a novel, it's 2 to 5,000 words a day because I love endings. And it's gotta be a subject you like. You need to feel comfortable in your writing, and that doesn't mean publishing. I wish people would learn to enjoy writing and quit cracking open a blank page thinking about where they're gonna publish the thing. Learn to enjoy the writing and learn to improve the craft, and that means, to me, you don't have to go to classes, you don't have to I mean, there are some good conferences out there, but the best way you're gonna learn is to read good writing in the genre you wanna write, and that's read the best of the best. Highlight that book, make notes in that book, note how the dialogue flowed, know how long the chapters were, how the setting became character. You need to look at all of these things and see how did they do it? Because that's the best teacher on the planet are the masters that go before you, and, uh, I've been to a lot of conferences, and I've taught a lot, but I that means I also sit in on a lot. And to listen to a class by somebody who's self-published 1 or 2 books, I'm done at that point. I look at somebody's bio before I sit in their class because I want to follow the path of somebody who's successful,
Right.
not just done it a couple of times. And as you know from Funds for Writers, I speak my mind. I'm pretty blunt, but it's the reason 28,000 readers like it, is I just cut through the chase and say, "This is what you should do. This is what has not worked for me." I'm not gonna tell you not to do something, but I'm gonna tell you from my experience what hasn't worked.
Well, wonderful. That sounds like some great advice, and we thank you for stopping by. If there's nothing else you'd like to share now, you're going to give us a document with some of these tips and tricks, correct?
Sure, sure, be
Right.
happy to.
Great. I appreciate that. Well, if there's nothing else you'd like to share, I'm going to go ahead and close out with the listeners.
One more thing, let you know, I do write mysteries. Right now, I have 23,
Wow.
and, they're anywhere you can buy a book, they're there, and as well as chopeclark.com.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that information will definitely be in the show notes. So I hope you enjoyed this interview with Hope Clark, and I thank you for joining us. If you'd like to work with me one on one as a writing coach, or an editor, my email is in the show notes. If you'd like to support a novel lunch, there's a link for that in the show notes, and information on how to reach Hope and to get the document that she has for us to download is in the show notes as well. Until next time, write happy.